At Starbound, we like to tell stories the human way, not with artificial slop or AI voices. What's HFY without humanity? So, subscribe if you want to keep it that way. My name is Dan, and let's begin. It was just another day when the self-imposed siege hit planet Nular hard, as the local councils fell in a simultaneous cascade, giving way to a single centralized power. Off-worlders of various species were simply thrown into jail with little regard for their rights, safety, and health. Many were severely hurt by the severe revolutionaries, who had bought into the narrative that the small off-worlder population was the root of their problems, conveniently forgetting that the 3 long-lasting wars their species had endured were the true thieves draining their resources. Among the many jail cells, Ron Miller was being dragged by his legs while unconscious, about to be thrown into a dark cell with an alien nurse, a small creature with long wings, and a huge, muscular, purple-scaled biped. All were fellow victims of this sudden revolution, forced to accept a grim, new reality. A heavy metal door slammed shut at once. The guard's boots stomped away, leaving behind only the shallow breathing of 4 very different beings trapped together in misery.
"Well, the human looks like he's about to die,"
said Graw, the small winged creature with vaguely scaled features and wings more like a bat's than a bird's. He walked closer to the unconscious man, his clawed feet clicking against the concrete floor, and added,
"I think the agents were quite rough with him."
The human's face was a mess of bruises, purple and yellow splotches, painting his pale skin like some grotesque canvas. Blood had dried at the corner of his mouth, and his breathing came in uneven gasps that made his chest rise and fall. "You are a nurse, right?" asked the muscular, dragoness-like bipedal named Ibila, sitting with her back to the wall. Her strong but wingless body was rigid as stone as she spoke, her massive arms crossed over her chest. "Do something to help him." Harry felt the weight of both their gazes pressing down on her. The pressure wasn't just external, it came from within too, from every fiber of her being that had been trained to help, to heal, to preserve life. The feeling of helplessness was like acid in her veins, burning and corrosive, eating away at her sense of purpose and identity. It was true, she was a nurse. She had spent cycles upon cycles studying xenobiology at the Intergalactic Medical Academy, had worked in emergency wards across 6 different systems, had held the lives of dozens of species in her tentacles. But currently, she had no equipment, no medical scanner to check for internal bleeding, no dermal regenerator to seal wounds, no species-specific pharmaceutical database to consult for proper treatment guidelines. She didn't even have a way to properly clean his wounds. Nothing but the stale, recycled air of this forsaken cell and the dirty water that occasionally dripped from a crack in the ceiling. The numerous tentacles above Harry's head suddenly became agitated, writhing and coiling in visible distress. Her eyes, beautiful organs of yellow surrounded by blue skin, both lost their vibrancy, dimming to a dull, lifeless gray as she expressed her despair. "I can't do much to help under the conditions of the cell," she said. "Without any tools, without any data on human biology, I'm basically useless." Graw looked at her with pleading eyes, his small face scrunched up in desperation, his wings folded tightly against his back, making him appear even smaller and more vulnerable than usual. "Isn't there anything you could do at all?" he asked. Harry's tentacles slowed their agitated movement as she began thinking out loud, her mind racing through her medical training. "I could try to assess his breathing patterns, but without knowing human baseline vitals, that's meaningless," she muttered, pacing in a small circle. "I could check his pulse, but where? Do humans have a pulse in their wrist like Denarians? In their necks like Thoraxians?" She shook her head, her tentacles mimicking the gesture, I could try pressure point therapy to stimulate his system, but if I hit a wrong spot, I could paralyze him or worse. She continued her mental catalogue, discarding option after option with increasing frustration. Cardiac massage? Don't know the human chest structure well enough. Could crush his heart instead of helping it. Induced respiration. Same problem with their lung capacity and rib fragility. Then, suddenly, her eyes brightened, flooding back to their full yellow and blue radiance. Her voice filled with renewed energy as she exclaimed, "Wait, I could use my tentacles to measure his internal temperature. I could probably tell if he has an infection-induced fever, and a few other things, just by knowing his temperature." She held up one of her longer head tentacles, the appendage extending to nearly twice its resting length. The thermoreceptors along the length are incredibly sensitive. They can detect temperature variations down to 1/10 of a degree, and she paused, her excitement building. My saliva has broad-spectrum antibiotic properties. It works on most carbon-based species, so I could at least help prevent infection in these wounds. The ancients of my species used to do exactly that before we had advanced medical technology. Both Graw and Ibila stared at her with expressions that somehow managed to be both surprised and deeply concerned. Graw tilted his head to one side, his small reptilian face scrunched up in confusion. "So, you're going to stick your tentacle, where exactly?" "For internal temperature measurement, we would need to access an internal cavity. There are typically 2 options for that in most species." "The mouth," Graw said. "Or the other end," Ibila finished. There was a long pause. "Wait, which one are you planning?" Graw asked Harrowly, his wings fluttering nervously. Harrowly's tentacles went rigid with shock. "What? Obviously I meant..." "Because the oral cavity would be more accurate for core temperature," Graw continued, talking above her. "But it's also more dangerous if he wakes up and bites. Those primates have very strong jaw muscles." "The alternative would be safer for the tentacle," Ibila offered, with the clinical detachment of someone discussing spacecraft maintenance. "But probably more, intrusive for the patient." "Are you two actually having this conversation right now?" Harrowly's voice pitched higher, her skin flashing through several colors of mortification. "I'm just saying," Graw continued, gesturing with his small clawed hands. "If you go with the mouth option and he wakes up, you could lose the tentacle entirely. But if you go with the posterior approach..." "You're being ridiculous," Harrowly said. "I'm being thorough." Harrowly watched them argue back and forth like she was observing some bizarre sporting event, her eyes swiveling between the two of them as her tentacles hung limply in complete disbelief. This could not be happening. She was a medical professional, for the love of the ancients. And here were 2 non-medical individuals having a detailed debate about the logistics of taking a temperature reading via... "Enough!" Harrowly finally shouted, cutting through their argument. Both Graw and Ibila fell silent, turning to look at her. "Of course, I would take his temperature through his mouth. What kind of barbaric first contact scenario do you think I'm running here?" Graw had the decency to look slightly embarrassed, his wings folding more tightly against his back. "However," Harrowly continued, pointing one tentacle at Graw, "I'm going to need your help. You need to help me open his mouth and make sure he doesn't bite down on my tentacles. They would take weeks to regrow if he bit off the limb. Weeks! And they're sensitive. It would be incredibly painful." Graw's embarrassment transformed into genuine concern. "You want me to put my hands near his mouth? Near the teeth that could bite off your tentacles?" "Yes." "The same mouth that you just said has very powerful jaw muscles?" "I don't recall saying that. You said that," Harrowly corrected. "But you agreed with the assessment," Graw said. Are you going to help me or not? Harrowly asked. Graw looked at the unconscious human, then at Harrowly, then back at the human. He let out a long, resigned sigh that seemed to deflate his entire small body. Fine, he said reluctantly. But if he wakes up and bites my fingers off, I'm blaming you. Both Graw and Harrowly knelt close to the human's face to prepare for the procedure. Up close, the human looked even more battered. There was a cut above his right eye that had swollen shut, and his jaw was beginning to bruise a deep purple color. Ibila remained seated against the wall, observing in silence, her massive form casting a shadow over the impromptu medical scene. Harrowly positioned herself at the human's head, her longest tentacle extending and hovering just above his lips. The appendage was about as thick as a human finger at the base, tapering to a more delicate point at the tip. Graw crouched beside the human's jaw, his small hands trembling as he prepared to pry open the mouth. Commencing the procedure, Harrowly announced with mock formality, trying to inject some levity into the tense situation. Patient is unconscious, unresponsive to external stimuli, and about to receive the finest tentacle-based thermometry available in this godforsaken cell. If he wakes up and bites, Graw said, his voice shaking just a bit, I'm afraid he might not stop with your tentacle. He might just go for my hand next, like some kind of feeding frenzy. Do humans do feeding frenzies? I feel like I heard they do feeding frenzies. Humans don't do feeding frenzies, Graw. Now, open his mouth, Harrowly said. Right, okay. Here we go. Graw carefully placed his small clawed fingers on the human's jaw, gently applying pressure to open it. The human's mouth opened with surprising ease, revealing rows of flat teeth with notably sharp canines. Oh, great. Those are definitely carnivore teeth. Definitely going to eat my hand. Harrowly didn't waste time. She carefully introduced her longest tentacle past the human's lips, sliding it slowly and carefully into his mouth. The tentacle had a slightly translucent quality, and as it delved deeper, she could feel the ambient temperature of the oral cavity, then the increasing warmth as she pushed further back toward the throat. The thermoreceptors along the tentacle's length were sending back constant data, mapping the temperature gradient. She pushed deeper, feeling the tentacle slide past the tongue, past the soft palate, and into the upper throat. The human's body gave a slight reflexive swallow, which was actually a good sign. Autonomic functions were still operating normally. Seconds passed in tense silence. How is it going? Graw asked, his eyes fixed on where Harrowly's tentacle disappeared into the human's mouth. Harrowly's face suddenly contorted to weird angles of surprise, her eyes widening so much they nearly doubled in size. Why is he so hot? She exclaimed. At that exact moment, the human's chest suddenly spasmed. His whole body convulsed with a massive, wet cough that sent both Graw and Harrowly flying backward. Graw tumbled head over wings, landing in an undignified heap near Ibila's feet. Harrowly managed to keep her balance, but her tentacle was still lodged in the human's throat as he woke. The human's eyes snapped open, wild, unfocused, and filled with panic. He was coughing violently, his hands coming up to his face where he felt something foreign and wrong in his mouth. His fingers closed around what felt like a wet, slippery noodle, and he began pulling it out with increasing horror and desperation. The tentacle just kept coming, like some grotesque magic trick, emerging from his mouth in coil after coil of glistening, alien appendage. What the? He coughed, still extracting the tentacle. Actual... More coughing. Hell! Finally, the tentacle came free with an obscene slurping sound that echoed through the cell. The human sat up abruptly, looking around wildly as he tried to orient himself. His eyes darted from the small winged creature sprawled on the floor to the massive purple-scaled biped against the wall. to the being with multiple tentacles on her head who was clutching the very appendage that had just been down his throat. "A prison," he muttered, recognizing the iron bars, the concrete walls, the general ambiance of incarceration. His voice was hoarse and rough. He worked his jaw experimentally, wincing at the pain, and then paused. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. He looked at the three aliens staring at him and asked, "Why do I feel violated?" There was a beat of awkward silence. "Well," Graw said slowly, getting to his feet and brushing off his wings, "that's actually a funny story." "Funny is not the word I would use," Ibila rumbled from her position against the wall. Harrilee stepped forward, her tentacles making apologetic gestures. "You were unconscious, severely injured. We thought you were dying." "We couldn't do anything to help you," Graw added, his voice earnest. "We had no medical equipment, no tools, nothing." The nurse decided that measuring your temperature was the only diagnostic action she could take in the cell, Ibila explained, with remarkable patience. "It was better than doing nothing while you died." The human, Ron, though they didn't know his name yet, processed this information slowly. His hand went to his throat, feeling the soreness there, and then he looked at Harrilee with an expression somewhere between understanding and residual horror. "You took my temperature? With your tentacle?" "My thermoreceptors are very sensitive," Harrilee offered weakly, her tentacles drooping in embarrassment. "It's medically sound." "Down my throat?" "You wouldn't have liked the alternative, trust me," said Harrilee. Ron opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. Finally, he just shook his head. "Okay, fine, whatever. How did I end up in this cell in the first place?" The three aliens exchanged glances, and Graw took the lead in explaining. "The planet outside has gone to hell," he said bluntly. "There was some kind of revolution. The local councils all collapsed and a centralized power took over. They're blaming all the off-worlders for their problems." "Classic," Ibila added. 3 major wars drained their resources, but instead of accepting responsibility, their leaders blamed the small population of aliens living here peacefully. "The guards brought you in about an hour ago," Harrilee continued. "You were completely unconscious, covered in bruises and blood. They threw you in here like you were garbage and left." "I honestly thought you would die," Graw said quietly. "The way they dragged you, the condition you were in, I've seen corpses that look better." Ron sat in silence for a moment, processing everything. He tried to move his arms, testing his range of motion, then rotated his shoulders experimentally. Everything hurt, but everything also worked. He could feel his wounds now, the sharp sting of cuts, the deep ache of bruises, the throbbing pain in his jaw and ribs. The adrenaline from waking up with a tentacle down his throat was beginning to fade, and all the pain was rushing in to fill the void. "Ow," he said simply, wincing as he touched his swollen eye. "Okay, yeah, I'm feeling it now." Harrilee smiled defensively, her tentacles making small, apologetic spirals. She spoke in a voice that was almost cutely contrite. "Sorry about the tentacle thing. I really thought you were dying, and it was all I could do to help." Ron looked at her for a long moment, then actually chuckled, which hurt his ribs, but he couldn't help it. You know what? I appreciate the effort. Weird as hell, but I appreciate it." He managed to stand, using the wall for support, and walked slowly to the metal bars that formed the front of their cell. The corridor beyond was dimly lit, and he could see other cells lining both sides. Some contained beings he didn't recognize, while others were ominously empty. He stood there for a moment, gripping the cold bars, feeling the full danger of their situation. Then he turned back to his cellmates and took a seat close to the wall, sliding down carefully to avoid jarring his injuries. "Do you three want to get out of here?" The question hung in the air. Graw was the first to respond, his small voice full of skepticism.
There's no way to flee. The doors are locked, the guards are armed, and this entire facility is built like a fortress.
"The guards are extremely rough," Harrilee added, her tentacles making worried gestures. "I've seen them beat prisoners for just looking at them wrong."
And they're not just throwing prisoners from different species together.
Graw continued, his wings rustling.
They're even putting males and females of the same species in cells together, which is, well, it's complicated, but trust me, it shows they have no regard at all for our lives. They would simply kill us if we attempted to escape."
Ron's eyebrows shot up. "Wait, males and females of the same species? You mean..." He looked between Graw and Ibila. There were some basic similarities, but the differences were something else. "No."
"Yes,"
Graw said, crossing his small arms over his chest.
"Ibila and I are both Krat people."
"No way," Harrilee said, her tentacles going rigid with shock. Ron turned to her, and for a moment a look of shared disbelief passed between human and non-human. "No fucking way," Ron said, standing up and moving closer to Harrilee as if seeking solidarity in his surprise. "Look at the size difference." He gestured between the tiny winged creature and the massive purple-scaled behemoth. "And the colors? You're brown and grey and she's deep purple. I mean..." He pointed at Graw's wings. "You have wings." Harrilee turned to address Ibila directly, her voice filled with doubt. "Is he lying? Are you really the same species?" Ibila, who had been patiently watching this exchange, simply said in a deep, rumbling voice, "The little one is saying the truth."
"Of course I am,"
Graw said indignantly.
"Are you two stupid? Have you never heard of sexual dimorphism?"
Both Harrilee and Ron exchanged a long look. Their faces, despite being from completely different evolutionary trees, somehow managed to express identical levels of complete disbelief. They said nothing, but their silence spoke volumes. The awkwardness in the cell became unbearable. Even Ibila shifted uncomfortably, her massive bulk creating scraping sounds against the concrete wall. Finally, sensing that their credibility was genuinely in question, Graw and Ibila decided to tell the story of their homeworld. "Our planet," Ibila began, "evolved us in strange ways." The males, Graw picked up the thread, got wings so that we could fly long distances to find a mate when we reached puberty. It's a biological imperative. When we come of age, we have to leave our birth territories and fly sometimes hundreds of kilometers to find females. "The small size," Ibila continued, "was a survival strategy. During mating flights, most males get eaten by giant gliders, massive flying predators that dominate our skies. So, our bodies stayed small to compensate for the colossal number of losses," Graw said, his voice carrying a hint of bitterness. "Smaller targets are harder to catch, faster, more maneuverable. But even so, only about 1 in 50 males survive the proving." Ron and Harrilee were listening with fascination now, their disbelief slowly transforming into horrified understanding. "Wait," Harrilee said, "even with technology, even with spacecraft and modern civilization, your species still does this?" "Yes," Ibila confirmed with a heavy sigh. "There are too many males, and they're hardly useful for anything because of their size. No offense, Graw." "Some taken," Graw muttered. "So they all undergo the proving," Ibila continued. "Only the survivors can find a mate. It's tradition, culture, and biological programming all wrapped into one. Very few of our kind question it." "Not me," Graw said firmly, his wings spreading slightly with defiance.
I didn't want this life. I decided to go off-world instead of participating in the proving. No mate is worth that risk. I'd rather see the galaxy and live on my own terms than die screaming in the claws of a glider just for the privilege of finding a mate.
Arily and Ron exchanged another long look. This time their shared expression was one of complete bewilderment at the weird duo they were locked up with. The universe was strange, they both seemed to be thinking. But this was particularly strange. Ron finally broke the silence by clearing his throat and changing the subject. Okay, that's something we can unpack later. Right now, let's get back to talking about our prison break. He lowered his voice, conscious of any guards who might be patrolling outside.
Did you not hear what I just said?
Graw hissed back, his wings fluttering in agitation.
The guards don't care about us. They're going to kill us if we fail. Probably kill us anyway when they get bored enough.
But Ron didn't allow the conversation to take a tangent this time. He leaned forward, his battered face intense despite the injuries. I have a friend, a human captain named James Vickers, waiting for me with a ship outside the city. If we can just get out these cells, there's a quick way off this planet. The three aliens stared at him. I only failed to leave the planet and got captured because I was unlucky, Ron continued. Wrong place, wrong time. Got caught in a mob, tried to fight my way out and, well, he gestured to his bruised face. Didn't go great. But my friend is still out there, and he's not leaving without me. This is not going to work, Arily said, her tentacles drooping. We have no way of breaking out of this cell. Ron's eyes began moving, scanning every aspect of their prison. He looked at the door, the locking mechanism visible as a complex assembly of metal components. He looked at the walls, solid concrete with no weakness. He looked at the bars, thick and unyielding. Then he looked at his three cellmates, really analyzed them, assessing their unique biological features with new appreciation. Arily, he said slowly, an idea forming. Could you use your tentacles to pry the locking mechanism open, the same way you, violated my throat? Arily's eyes widened. I hadn't thought of that. She moved quickly to the door, pressing her face close to the bars to examine the lock. Several of her tentacles extended through the gaps, probing carefully at the mechanism. The others watched in tense silence as minutes ticked by. Arily's face contorted in concentration, her tentacles making minute adjustments, feeling for the internal components of the lock. Ron could see her tentacles actually pushing into the mechanism itself, thin enough to slip between the metal pieces. Finally, Arily withdrew her tentacles and shook her head. It's too hard. The components inside are too stiff, and I don't have enough strength to move them. I can feel them, I can touch them, but I can't manipulate them enough to actually unlock it. Ron didn't give up. His mind was racing now, turning the problem over from every angle. What other skills do you all have? Anything I'm not aware of? Graw shrugged his small shoulders. I can fly. If we manage to escape, I could help contact your captain quickly, cover ground faster than any of you. But that's my only skill. I'm not strong, I'm not particularly clever, and I definitely can't pick locks. Ron turned to Ibila. Oh, what about you? The massive Krat female was quiet for a moment, then spoke in her deep, rumbling voice. I'm very strong. Stronger than I look, actually. And I look quite strong. She uncurled slightly from her seated position, and Ron could see the coiled power in her muscular frame. I also have an acid gland in my tail, but she added quickly before anyone got excited. The acid isn't strong enough to melt metal bars, and I'm not strong enough to break them either. I've already considered it. Acid, Ron said slowly. The gears in his mind were turning faster now. Arily's tentacles drooped sadly. Looks like we're not fleeing anything soon. We're stuck here until they decide what to do with us. No, Ron said firmly, standing up despite the pain in his legs. He began pacing back and forth in the small space, his mind working through the problem. 3 paces to the wall, turn, 3 paces back. The others watched him, confusion evident on their alien faces. Then he stopped abruptly and turned to Harley. Could you use your tentacles to add drops of acid inside the locking mechanism? The 3 aliens stared at him in complete awe, as if he'd just proposed reversing the flow of time itself. Graw was the first to find his voice. Are all humans this creative about getting out of prison? Ron laughed, the sound rough and slightly pained, but genuine. Humans are the best when it comes to 2 things: fixing stuff that's broken and breaking stuff that works. It's basically our entire evolutionary strategy. Ibila stared at him a bit longer than the others, her large eyes unreadable. Then she said slowly, with what might have been respect in her voice, I believe you. Ron played it cool, giving her a slight smile despite his swollen lip. Yeah, of course you do. Then he turned back to Harley, his expression becoming serious again. Can we do this? Is it possible? Harley's tentacles writhed in clear discomfort. Putting acid on my tentacles is going to suck, she said bluntly. It won't kill them, but it's going to hurt like hell, and they'll take weeks to recover fully. Skin will be damaged, the sensory receptors will be compromised. She trailed off, then her eyes brightened with determination. But I'm ready to pay that price for our freedom. Let's do it. What followed were the longest hours any of them had experienced in recent memory. The cell had no windows, no way to track time except by the dimming and brightening of the corridor lights that suggested some simulation of a day-night cycle. But they used that to their advantage. Harley positioned herself at the door, her tentacles extended through the bars toward the locking mechanism. Ibila moved close, positioning her tail so that the acid gland was accessible. The process was painstaking and clearly agonizing for Harley. She would extend one tentacle to Ibila's tail, where the larger alien would excrete a single drop of clear, viscous acid. The drop would coat the tip of the tentacle, and Harley's face would immediately contort in pain. Then, moving with excruciating precision, she would guide the tentacle into the lock mechanism and deposit the acid onto specific metal components. I can feel it eating through the metal, Harley whispered after the first few attempts. But it's so slow. We'll need dozens of applications to weaken the internal mechanism enough. Ron stayed close to her, and after the first hour, he started holding her free appendages, not the tentacles she was using for the work, but the others that hung loosely from her head. He held them gently in his human hands, providing what comfort he could. Harley seemed to appreciate it. Her pain flashed colors became slightly less intense when he held her tentacles. Time crawled forward. Drop by agonizing drop, application by careful application. Graw kept watch on the corridor, ready to signal if any guards approached. Ibila continued to produce the acid, her seemingly endless reservoir of the substance proving invaluable. Hours passed. The corridor lights dimmed to what Ron guessed was their nighttime setting. The guards outside began to look sleepy, their patrols becoming more sporadic and less attentive. Harley's tentacles looked awful now. The skin had taken on a rough, damaged appearance, and she could no longer control some of the finer movements. But she persisted, her face set in grim determination. Then, deep into the night, there was a sound. Click. It was small, barely audible, but to the 4 prisoners, it sounded like a gunshot. They all froze, hardly daring to breathe. Ron slowly reached out and touched the door. With nothing but the gentlest pressure from his fingertips, it swung open, smoothly and silently. "Freedom!" Graw whispered excitedly, his wings spreading. Ron shut the door quickly as heavy boots echoed down the corridor. A guard walked past, yawning and adjusting his weapon strap, completely oblivious to how close he'd come to discovering their escape. When the danger had passed, when the guard's footsteps had faded into the distance, Graw turned back to the others with mortification written across his small features.
"Sorry," he whispered. Sorry, I'm sorry."
They all stared at him with expressions that communicated very clearly how close he'd come to ruining everything. But they also understood. Hope after despair was intoxicating, and Graw had simply let his enthusiasm get the better of him. "It's okay," Ron whispered back, "but from here on, absolute silence. Understood?" 3 alien heads nodded in the darkness. They left their cell slowly and in silence, moving like shadows given form. The corridor stretched before them, lined with cells on both sides. Some contained other prisoners who stared at them with wide, hopeless eyes. Ron wanted to help them, wanted to open every cell, but he knew that would create chaos they couldn't control. Their priority had to be getting themselves out first. The prison layout was simple but secure. One main corridor leading to a guard station, then, beyond that, the exit to the outside world. They moved in a single file, with Ibila in front due to her size and strength, Ron and Harley in the middle, and Graw bringing up the rear, his small size allowing him to dart between shadows and keep watch behind them. They made it past the first checkpoint without incident. The guards there were both asleep, slumped in their chairs with their weapons resting against the desk. Ron gestured for everyone to keep moving, to not even breathe too heavily as they crept past. The second corridor was longer, and here they had their first real challenge. A guard was walking toward them, still alert, his eyes scanning the hallway. There was nowhere to hide. The corridor was bare except for the cells on either side, and diving into an open cell would just trap them again. Ibila made a split-second decision. She pressed herself against the wall and gestured frantically for the others to do the same. The shadows here were deeper, and she was banking on the guard's complacency, on his assumption that no prisoner could possibly be out of their cells. The guard walked past within arm's reach. Ron could smell the acrid scent of whatever stimulant the Severe used to stay awake. He held his breath, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure the guard would hear it. But the guard kept walking, turned a corner, and disappeared. They rushed forward, moving faster now, the exit in sight. Through a set of double doors, they could see the guard station that controlled the main entrance. 4 guards sat there, all armed, all awake, all positioned between the prisoners and freedom. It was Ibila who struck first, bursting through the doors with shocking speed for something so large. The guards barely had time to register her presence before she was among them. Her massive fist caught the first guard in the chest, sending him flying backward into the wall with a sickening crack. The second guard reached for his weapon, but Ibila's tail whipped around, the appendage catching him across the face and sending him spinning to the ground. The third guard actually managed to raise his weapon, his finger tightening on the trigger. And Ibila bulldozed him like he was made of paper, her shoulder catching him square in the torso. He hit the wall with such force that the impact actually cracked the concrete, and he slumped down, unconscious before his weapon clattered to the floor. The fourth guard, seeing his 3 colleagues dispatched in seconds, wisely decided to run. He bolted for an internal alarm, but Graw was faster, launching himself from Ron's shoulder and using his wings to gain speed. The small Krat male collided with the guard's face, his claws finding purchase on the Severe's uniform. And in the ensuing chaos, Harley's tentacles whipped forward and swept the guard's leg out from under him. He went down hard, his head bouncing off the floor, and moved no more. The entire encounter had taken perhaps 20 seconds. "Go, go, go!" Ron shouted, no longer concerned with silence. Alarms were already beginning to sound, the prison waking up to the reality of an escape in progress. They burst through the main doors and into the night air of Nula. The air was thick and humid. Above them, the sky was a sickly green color, the planet's polluted atmosphere refracting the light of its distant sun. Ron oriented himself quickly, looking for landmarks. There, a grove of trees about 200 meters distant, their leaves reflecting a sickly yellow in the ambient light from the prison. "That's the way," he pointed. "Near those trees, there should be an open field. The ship will be parked there in stealth mode." "On it!" Graw spread his wings and launched himself into the sky, disappearing into the darkness with remarkable speed. His small size made him nearly invisible against the night sky, and within seconds he had vanished entirely. The remaining three ran for cover as the entire prison erupted in alarm behind them. Floodlights snapped on, bathing the area in harsh white light. Ron could hear shouting, the sounds of guards mobilizing, weapons being charged. They dove behind a pile of industrial debris about 50 meters from the prison entrance, pressing themselves flat against the ground. Ron's heart was hammering in his chest, his injured body protesting every movement. But adrenaline was a wonderful thing. It made everything possible, even running on what were probably cracked ribs and a possibly fractured ankle. "They're going to find us," Harrilee whispered, her damaged tentacles hanging limply around her face. "Just wait," Ron said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Graw will come through." More shouting from the prison. The guards were organizing themselves, beginning to spread out in search patterns. Ron could see them gesturing toward the city, clearly assuming the prisoners would try to lose themselves in the urban sprawl. None of them seemed to be looking toward the industrial wasteland, where they were actually hiding. Minutes passed like hours. Ron could feel sweat running down his back despite the cool night air. Ibila was so still she might have been a statue, her purple scales blending remarkably well with the shadows. Harrilee's blue skin was dimmed to almost nothing, a survival instinct that made her nearly invisible. More guards poured out of the prison. They were spreading out now, some heading toward the city as predicted, but others were beginning to sweep the perimeter. It was only a matter of time before they checked the debris field. "Come on, Graw," Ron muttered under his breath. "Come on, come on, come on." A guard walked within 10 meters of their hiding spot, his weapon raised, his eyes scanning the darkness. Ron could see his finger resting on the trigger, could see the way he was methodically checking every shadow. In seconds, he would be on top of them. And then, suddenly, the air directly above them shimmered and solidified. The ship dropped its stealth mode, materializing out of nowhere like a massive mechanical god descending from the heavens. It was a cargo hauler, all function and no form, but to Ron, it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. The belly of the ship was already opening, a ramp extending down toward them. In the open cargo bay, Graw was jumping up and down, waving his small arms frantically. "Come inside!" he screamed over the noise of the ship's engines. "Hurry!" They didn't need to be told twice. All three of them sprinted for the ramp, Ron's injured body finding reserves of strength he didn't know he had. Behind them, the guards had noticed the ship and were opening fire, energy bolts sizzling through the air and splashing harmlessly against the ship's shields. Ron hit the ramp first, stumbling and nearly falling, but Ibila caught him with one massive hand and practically threw him into the cargo bay. Harrilee was right behind him, her tentacles streaming behind her. Ibila brought up the rear, her bulk filling up the ramp as more weapons fire concentrated on her position. The ramp began closing before Ibila was fully inside, the ship already beginning to lift. She grabbed onto the edge and pulled herself up with raw strength, rolling into the cargo bay just as the ramp sealed shut. The ship rocketed upward, the acceleration pressing them all to the floor. Through the small viewport on the cargo bay door, Ron could see the prison falling away, growing smaller, the guards becoming tiny figures firing uselessly at the sky. And then they punched through the atmosphere, and the sickly green sky gave way to the pure black of space, and they were free. Ron and Harrilee stood together at the main viewport, watching as the hostile planet Nular grew distant after their successful prison break. The planet looked almost peaceful from up here, its polluted atmosphere creating swirls of green and brown across its surface. It was hard to believe that just an hour ago they'd been prisoners there, facing an uncertain and likely fatal future. "I'm grateful," Ron said softly, his eyes still on the shrinking planet, "that I ended up in a cell with you and the others. If I'd been alone, or with literally any other combination of species, we'd all still be down there, probably dead by now." Carolee turned to look at him, her damaged tentacles moving weakly. Despite the pain she was clearly still experiencing, she managed something that Ron interpreted as a smile. "I was thinking the same thing," she agreed. "If even one of us had been missing, if you hadn't had the idea, if I couldn't work the lock, if Ibila didn't have the acid, if Graw couldn't fly to find the ship, we wouldn't have made it. We needed every single one of us." They both turned back to look at the center of the cargo hold, where the other two members of their unlikely escape team were engaged in conversation. Graw was perched on top of a cargo container, his wings spread to their full impressive span, as he recounted some detail of his flight to the ship. Ibila sat on the floor, her massive bulk taking up a significant portion of the available space, listening with what might have been amusement in her large eyes. Everything about them was so different. Graw was barely larger than a human child, covered in brown and grey scales, with delicate features and wings that looked too large for his body. Ibila was enormous, easily 2.5 meters tall and probably twice that in bulk. Her body all coiled muscle and raw power, with no wings to speak of. The idea that they were male and female of the same species was still difficult to reconcile with visual evidence. "You know," Carolee said with a thoughtful tone, "it's funny. When you look at them, it's almost impossible to believe they're the same species." Ron nodded in agreement, a small smile playing at his injured lips. Carolee continued, her tentacles gesturing between herself and Ron. "But when I look at us, you and me, we're actually way more alike than those two are. I mean, we're both bipedal, roughly the same size, a similar body shape. We both have heads with sensory organs, appendages for manipulation." She trailed off, clearly warming to her theme. "We're more similar than Graw and Ibila are to each other, even though they share most of their DNA." Ron turned to her. She was right, in a way. Strip away the tentacles and the blue skin, and yes, they had more in common with each other than the other pair did. "Yeah," he said with a genuine smile. "You're right. We're basically cousins compared to them." They shared a moment of companionable silence, watching the strange duo continue their conversation in the middle of the cargo bay. Then Ron's expression grew more serious. "Well, what are you going to do now?" he asked. "Your job as a nurse on Nular is gone. The whole planet wants to kill you. Your tentacles are damaged. You're effectively a refugee." Carolee was quiet for a long moment, her tentacles moving in slow patterns. Then she turned to face the viewport again, where the stars stretched out before them in an infinite tapestry of possibility. Despite everything, the pain, the uncertainty, the loss of everything she'd built on Nular, her eyes widened with what Ron was learning to recognize as optimism, even hope. She smiled, the expression clear despite their biological differences. "I have no idea," she said simply. Ron looked at her, then back out at the stars, and he found himself smiling too. "Me neither." The ship continued its flight away from Nular, carrying 4 unlikely friends toward an uncertain but infinitely more promising future, where the only certainty was that they would face whatever came next together.